So, Hilda, which you know because you've seen the video before, I'm guessing. This is the second video of, well, two so far that I've done about the Hillman Imp. The first one you might want to check out first. It'll be on the playlist. It's basically a brief history of the Hillman Imp as a car. Not this particular car, just as a car, as a model. There are loads of things missed out on it. People who are banging to Hillman Imps will be picking holes out of it like I would pick holes out of anyone doing anything with the Citroen BX. This particular video follows on from that one. So if you haven't seen that one, you don't have to see that one, but there will be bits of it that fill in gaps in this one that, you know, it's like Marvel films. You don't have to see them in the right order, but it works better if you do. So this particular video is more about this actual car, which is known as Hilda. It's not known as Hilda because of me. I didn't name it. I don't really name cars that much, apart from vans after motoring journalists that I quite fancied when I was younger. But, this particular car, named Hilda by a previous owner, guy who owned it before me. His name was Tim. And if it wasn't for Tim, this car wouldn't be here. It may not even exist anymore. So I'll whip it back as far as I know and then bring us up to where we are. So it was bought brand new at Lime Court Garage in Axminster, as I mentioned, which is in Devon or Dorset. I can't remember which one. Bought there, don't know who by, don't know, I mean, maybe one day I'll find out if DVLA will relay the information, I don't know. I've got to find a checkbook to do that. And there's GDPR issues, so you can't necessarily find information out anymore. But bought then, I don't know who by. The last known owner I've got of the car lived in Seaton. Now Seaton is, I'm pretty sure that's in Dorset, but I could be wrong. That's not far from Axminster. So the car hasn't travelled far in that time. I've got some pictures of it, which was kindly supplied by him actually. I think this was dated around 2006, and I'll put those on the screen about now. Basically, that is as good as, I mean, it's the closest thing we've got to know what this car looked like when it was in daily service, when it was new. It is a deluxe model. It's a Hillman Imp Deluxe. Don't get confused into thinking deluxe means it is luxurious, because it isn't. Deluxe is kind of the name they gave to basic stuff. There probably was a basic Imp below this. I think there was an Imp Super as well. I don't know if that was higher or lower, to be honest. All the names seem to just be random. So is Super better than Deluxe generally? I don't know which one's which. I would have thought Deluxe was like top, but maybe not. So that would have meant that it was fairly basic, white steel wheels, probably with some chrome hubcaps on there. It would have had an embellisher, a trim down the side. It doesn't anymore. It didn't have a glove box, I know that. It did have a kind of like a recycled cardboard type cubby hole. It doesn't have that anymore. It will have a glove box. It didn't have the door cappings. I may have mentioned that in the last one. I can't remember, but it doesn't have door cappings. It's basically, yeah, it's pretty basic. Pretty basic. So yeah, as a Hillman Imp Deluxe, it was a fairly basic car. As the previous video shows us, because this is a 1973 car, this is a Chrysler era Hillman Imp. So it's not a Chrysler Imp. I think some people did refer to them as those, but it's not. It is a Hillman Imp. Hillman was a brand and was until the Imp died. I think Chrysler Corporation killed the Hillman brand off when they killed the Imp off in 1976. So being a 73 car, this is, you know, 3 years later, Imp's dead completely. It was probably considered pretty outdated by 1976, if I'm honest. But this particular one, it would have been quite a cheap car. It would have been bottom dollar, I imagine. It would have driven out the garage in Axminster, and then somewhere between then and 2006 ended up in Seaton. The fella who owned it in Seaton had it for a little while. He said it was pretty good, and that is where I found out that I think the car has only done about 49, well, at the time he had it, it had only done about 49,000 miles, which is, I mean, I want to say it's crazy, but at the same time it might not be. I mean, it's only a little car, and back in the old days 100,000 miles was considered end of life, so maybe not. But yeah, done about, near as makes a difference, 50,000 miles. He had the car for a while. He sent me some pictures of it, which I've shown you. It then went on somewhere else. I don't know how and where and why and everything and the order it went in. It may have gone to the next fella who lived just outside Winchester, funnily enough, where I lived at the time. So he was pretty much a mile away from where I was living when he owned this car. This is a chap who I actually ended up speaking to with regards to TVRs as well. He's into all that kind of thing. And he had this car. Now, he's the person who started taking it apart, and I think he took the engine out of it. He's into his motor racing. He likes his motorsport. And I imagine he saw this and thought, that's a fairly decent shell. I'll make something fun out of that. And so he started taking it apart. But for whatever reason, that didn't get completed. And then it went from just outside Winchester all the way back over to Dorset again. Completely by chance. Went to another chap who I think, I could be wrong, I don't know the story, but I think he had quite a few imps. It was on a farm. The pictures of it on the farm, not looking so clever. Still mostly complete inside, but no engine, gearbox is gone. Yeah, it's looking a bit sad. Cars, when they get to that state, well, they don't often come back out of them. Sometimes they do. If they're hellishly expensive and valuable, they will. But Hillman Imp, not so sure. Certainly wasn't a mint shell by any stretch. It did need work. And it's not a particularly rare one. I mean, it's 73 deluxe. It's nothing special. If you rock up in the Hillman Imp Owners Club with one of these, they're not going to get that excited about it, to be honest. In fact, if you rock up with this one, with the engine I've got, they kind of turn their nose up a little bit, some of them, but that's part of the fun. So it went over there. He did, I don't know if he did any work on the car, but he had other imps. It kind of just sat about and eventually got put up for sale. And that's where Tim came in. Now, Tim was based more sort of over towards Portsmouth area. You'll notice it's all along the south coast. The whole thing is along the south coast. The car's built just outside Glasgow, in Linwood, which is just outside, well, I think it's just outside Glasgow or near enough in Glasgow. The factory was subsidised by one of the governments. I can't remember whether it was red or blue. It was basically, there was an area of unemployment because there used to be a shipbuilding industry on the banks of the Clyde. I mean, there probably still is, but it's fairly small compared to what it was. They needed something to do. So government gave Roots Group some money, said, please build your factory. And then when a man came over from America, looking all dapper and suave, and said he wanted to do the same thing in Belfast, they gave him the money again. And that went well. So yes, the Imp was built just outside Glasgow. In fact, in my one of my weird natures, one of my weird things to do is to end up, because I'm actually a little bit oddball in these circles, in the weird car Twitter circles. I quite like football. I'm a bit of a football fan. And I do have a weird little habit of following teams from areas that my cars were built in. I don't know why. I think it's just because I kind of put my mind in the picture of the men and women who worked in the factories and got paid by the factories and then went out on the weekends to watch the football team. And I think, well, which football team did they support? And this wasn't the era of sort of the glory hunters that we have now. I think they would have supported their local teams. And their local team for this car, according to my app on my phone, is St Mirren. So that's a completely random and useless piece of information. But for that reason, I follow St Mirren, kind of, slightly. Yeah, that's that. I don't know what that's got to do with anything, but there you go. So, built in Scotland, it has spent its entire life down here. Gone from Axminster to Seaton to just outside Winchester to Dorset again, back to Portsmouth now. That's where we're at. Now, Tim bought the car because he always wanted a Hillman Imp. He always wanted to build a Hillman Imp, a project car. And he came to us through a friend of a friend, hello Charlotte, and she basically said, well, if you want to do something crazy with that car, go and speak to Rich because he'll probably be up for it. And I was up for it because I also like Hillman Imps. I've never had one. I probably never would have bought one. But I always wanted one myself. I quite like the look of one of those in a way. And yeah, he came to us and he said, I want to build a 100 horsepower Hillman Imp. And I said, okay. When what I really should have said was, I don't really know much about Hillman Imps, Tim. I would suggest taking it to someone who does. Now, Tim's plan for the Hillman Imp, look, I've moved the camera, that's well artistic. Tim's plan for the Hillman Imp was that he wanted to put a motorbike engine in the back of it. Or not necessarily a motorbike engine, but something along those lines. Kind of a common thing to do. You see it with various old classic cars. Some people cut them up and put motorbike engines in. So one of the first things he said was, shall we put a superbike engine in it? And I said, I wouldn't. The reason I wouldn't do it is because I've driven cars with superbike engines in, and I mean, personally, I don't like them. The problem with cars that have superbike engines in is that superbike engines themselves aren't made for cars. They're made for motorbikes, which weigh about 200 kilos at most. And cars don't. Cars tend to be a bit heavier than that. Now, there's nothing wrong with motorbike engines at all across any spectrum. In fact, motorbike engines from an engineering point of view are probably superior to car engines. They're amazing, really. They're really, really good. But the thing is, because of the way that motorbikes are light, and because of the fact they can have silly gearing that you couldn't have with a car. I mean, most motorbikes, superbikes can do 70 in first gear normally. It's just a totally different thing. It's like trying to put a helicopter engine in a car. I mean, yeah, you could get it to work, but it's not made for it. The thing with a motorbike engine, I've driven so many cars. Like, we did a live Q&A the other day, and someone said, what's the weirdest car you've driven, or the best car, or whatever. I've forgotten more cars than I remember, but I've driven sort of Z car minis. I've driven Westfields, an XTR with a higher booster engine stands out. I've driven all sorts of cars with superbike engines in. Nothing with a sort of a low revving, sluggy kind of motorbike engine, but most of them have the superbike engines. And the problem with those is they don't have the low down torque that a car engine has. They've got power, but you have to rev the nuts off it to get it. Which in a bike is fine. You don't need low down grunt because the thing only weighs 200 kilos and you can get it going with your feet if you have to. Whereas with a car, you can't. You have to be able to drive in traffic easily. You know, a car has to get itself going. And, you know, there's a lot more mass. There's a lot more inertia to deal with. So a bike engine isn't ideal. If you've got a car like a Westfield or something like that, and it's just, you're on racetracks with it and you're always sitting at 12, 13,000 revs, banging through the sequential gearbox, it's great. Makes a lot of sense, a lot of fun. If you're trying to put one in a hatchback and drive it through town and do U-turns, bearing in mind you don't have a reverse gear, you have to engineer something in. Some of them are really crude as well and horrible. That's what some of them use starter motors on ring gears. Ugh. So my point to Tim was, look, if you want 100 horsepower reliably, which was, it seemed to be his aim, I would recommend going with a car engine. His first car engine suggestion was a Toyota Starlet Turbo. I said, okay, how much are they? About £3,500 for one of those engines. Yeah, probably not. Because it dawned on me, I knew early on that the thing we were going to struggle with was making it fit this car. That's where the money was going to come in. Spending a ton of money on an engine was pointless. The elephant in the room at the moment is that people are saying, well, hang on, why are you not putting the imp engine in it? You said the other video, it was really good. Why aren't you doing that? Well, it didn't come with one. So it came with no engine. And he wanted a reliable 100 horsepower or thereabouts. Now, you can get an imp engine to 100 horsepower. I mean, you can probably take them higher and they'll rev to 10,000 RPM or something stupid like that. But on the road, which is where this predominantly would have spent its time, starts to become a little bit compromised. Reliability, drivability. But it's going to have a camshaft so leery, the lobes are basically squares. Not ideal. Not ideal, really. I mean, it could have been done, but it would have cost a fortune in bits as well. So the plan was always to put something different in it, which would just give that 100 horsepower unstressed, reliable, and we can sort out the rest of it later on. So that's why it doesn't have an imp engine in it. But how did we end up with the engine it's got? What engine has it got? Well, the clue is at the beginning of the title, and possibly in everything I've ever written about it. It has the engine from a Citroen Saxo VTR. How did we end up with the engine from a Citroen Saxo VTR? You might ask. If you didn't, can you just ask yourself quickly? Because then this... yeah, basically, do you remember I said how Peugeot, PSA, bought out the Roots Group? Well, that's where there's a bit of a tenuous link. Because the engine in the Imp, the original engine, lays down at an angle. Not entirely flat, probably about, I don't know how many degrees it is. Somewhere between 30 and 15, I don't know. But it sits quite almost horizontal to make it fit in the back. And when we were looking for engines for this car, although I knew it wasn't an ideal scenario, I knew through my Citroen geekiness that there were engines that went into BXs and Sambas and Peugeot 104s and LNAs and all sorts of other random things, which was known as a suitcase engine. It was also fitted to 205s. They're probably the most common car they were fitted to. It's a suitcase engine. It lays flat, pretty much. I mean, it was 15 degrees, I think it was. And I thought, well, could put in one of those. They did a 1400 version, but they sound like a bag of spanners. They really do. Not the ideal thing. A lot of them had a gearbox based in kind of in the sump as well, kind of like a Mini. So there would be some work to do there as well. And I think it had been done though. I knew I'd seen it done. In fact, I think there is a video on YouTube now of one of them done. And so, with that in mind, I went onto Google and I punched in Hillman Imp Peugeot engine and found nothing. So then I punched in, because I'm clever, kind of, Hillman Imp Citroen engine, knowing that they are largely the same thing. And what I found was a link to a Scandinavian ice racing series from the 80s and 90s and stuff. And the cc of the engine fitted 1360. So 1360 cc I knew was the size of the biggest suitcase engine, which is what they called it, a suitcase engine, fitted to those Peugeots and Citroens. I thought, brilliant. All I want to do is find a picture of one to show it works, and then possibly see how you might go about getting one, see what the problems are with the gearbox, because of course they're all mounted transversely, those engines, and in an Imp it's not, it's in line. And so I clicked that and it said 1360cc. And then further down, it said Citroen AX GT engined Hillman Imp. All right, okay. What? Sorry? Citroen AXs came out in 1987, or 86 technically. In this country, 87 near enough. And they were all fitted with the TU engine, which replaced the suitcase engine. The TU engine sat almost bolt upright in the engine bay. And I thought, okay, that's odd, because the AX uses a TU engine. And I know that for a fact. You can't fit a suitcase engine in an AX. So what's happened there? And basically the cars that were winning this Scandinavian ice racing series were clearing up. They had AX GT engines in the back. And I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting, seeing as they're totally the wrong shape. So if these engines are totally the wrong shape, how are they fitting them into Hillman Imps? Well, I don't know. I never found a picture, if I'm honest. But what I did do is go back onto Google and punch in Hillman Imp Peugeot engine or Citroen engine TU3S, TU3S being the engine code of the engine used in the AX GT. And what I found was a picture of a chap's Hillman Imp or Stiletto or whatever it was. And he had a picture of a TU3 engine sat in the back of a Hillman Imp. I think by his own admission, it looked like it had been thrown in from about 50 feet with a bit of scaffolding, but it was in there. The sump was off the ground, it was fitted. That suggested to me straight away, this is interesting, because I know the TU engine. I know the TU engine really well. I grew up with them. It's the first engine I ever worked on was a TU engine, a 1400. They can give the 100 horsepower easily. They can do it reliably. They're really, really cheap. They're quite simple. The only thing that goes against them really is the fact that it sits bolt upright. But if this fella's managed to show us that it can fit, maybe it fits. And so I went back to Tim and I said, Tim, you've employed me to find an engine for your car. And I think I have. Well, maybe not an engine. I might have just found a type of engine that we need. But I think the TU engine will fit. Now, the TU engine was not the most glamorous thing we could have come up with. People will have noted that because it says VTR inside on there, and because the engine is from a VTR, some people would assume it had the engine from a Honda VTR motorbike. I think it's a Fireblade or Super, but I don't know Hondas, or I don't know motorbikes. But no, it was from a Saxo VTR. Now I know the Saxo VTR, and that was one of the selling points of this engine idea. I know TU's inside out, as I say. It ticked all the boxes. It wasn't exciting. Fairly humdrum. The TU to PSA is what the CVH is to Ford. It's just an engine. It's just a means of making a car move. That's literally all it is. The only one that was sort of slightly exciting was probably the 1300 version used in the 106 Rally and Citroen AX Sport. The 16 valve version went into the Saxo VTS and the 106 GTI. And important to point out at this point, you have to remember the difference between the Saxo VTR and the Saxo VTS. I realise that my hands are the opposite way around here to how they need to be. But Saxo VTR and the VTS, they look the same, but the VTR only had an 8-valve version of the engine. The VTS had a 16-valve version of the engine. Now, the Saxo VTR engine people who know TU engines will be listening at the moment and going, hang on, whoa, back up. The fella in Ireland, or wherever it was, who put in a TU3S engine has taken it from an AXGT. Yes, he has. And the engine from an AXGT is all aluminium. Now, the engine in the original Imp system is all aluminium, and as I said in the last video, which you should have been paying attention, was very light. The AXGT engine is very light. In fact, it's 1 kilo heavier than a standard Imp engine. So that shows you how close they are. In fact, if you tip the AXGT engine on its side a little bit, the similarities in the block are actually quite surprising. There's quite a lot going on there. But people who know TU engines will be looking at this and saying, well, hang on, a VTR does use a TU engine, yes, but it's not all alloy. They've got an iron engine block, aluminium head steel, iron engine block, and it's true, they do have that. The reason they have that is because the alloy engines have wet liners, and you just couldn't bore them out anymore. There wasn't enough left. You couldn't fit bigger liners in there, and you couldn't make them any thinner because they would have cracked. Ask Volvo when they took their 2.3 out to 2.5. So that presents us with a challenge, because the 1400 engine that the chap in Ireland used and the engines used in XGTs are quite rare. You don't find many of them. They were about 85 horsepower. Remember, we were aiming for the 100 horsepower. You can get a 1400 with an alloy block in a Saxo, a standard Saxo, about 75 horsepower, something like that. Bit of a faff to get it up to the 100 after that. I mean, you could, but you'd have to spend money on it. So the TU5 engine, as the 1600 is known, that came out of a Saxo, came with 90 horsepower from the factory. And that Saxo, I think it was R903CCA, RIP. That car actually went on the rolling road and made 99 horsepower just before it was taken apart. 99 horsepower with seemingly a huge absence of any service history going on with it. It was sludgy, it was filthy, at 130,000 miles or so. You wouldn't buy this car for the engine, and that's exactly what we did. We bought this car for the engine for £300. The engine came out of the Saxo. The Saxo went to the Saxo heaven, and the engine is now in the back of this. So this is now a 1600cc Imp. A shout out must go to Tim, because obviously it was his passion that got this car off the ground. It was his money that went into it, or certainly took it up to near completion. It was everything that went into this car came from him. It was either a combination of us here working at the unit, or it was him. Money or graft. It was one of the two. And unfortunately for Tim, for whatever reason, he couldn't see it through. He had to bail out on this car. Basically, the decision was given to me. The choice was given to me. Would I like to buy the car from him and take it on and see it through? Or do we break it for parts? Selling it to somebody else was not an option. The amount of money that he ploughed into it, and it's considerable. When you start seeing the spec of some of the stuff on it, you think, okay, like the custom wheels that you can't even, no, you can only see one. Yeah, a bit of money went into this, and then all the labour and designing and everything that went with it. And of course, on our side of it, we didn't spend the money that he spent, but we did put in the blood, sweat and tears. And he felt nobly that one of us should benefit. It was either going to be him or it was going to be us, and it shouldn't be a stranger. A stranger shouldn't get all the money he paid us to do it, and then all the sweat and effort and tears we put into it to just not see it done. Because the chances are someone might have just bought it and broken it for bits anyway. So his logic was, and it wasn't holding me over a barrel at all, there was no ransom involved in it whatsoever, but his logic was either he breaks it for parts and tries to get most of his money back, or not most of it, but some of it, or I buy it from him and take it over. And I imagine he was selling it back to me for the price that he could get for the bits that were on it. So I basically said, I will only accept that if you tell me what you want for it. I'm not going to go into what it was. You tell me what you want for it. I'm not going to haggle you. I'm not going to chip you. If I can afford it, I'll say yes. And if I can't afford it, I'll say no. Simple. He named a very fair price, if I'm honest. He clearly just wanted the car to go to, if it couldn't go to him, go to the next best place. And yeah, I ended up buying it from him. And that would have been in about 2016, 2017. So yeah, that's kind of where Tim ended and where the next part of the journey continued. Now, when I took the car on from Tim, it was technically MOT'd. We had got it that far. We got it to the point that it was running and it was MOT'd. And I first drove the car probably only a couple of days later. He had test driven it once before he sold it to me. I don't know if he drove it and thought, oh, that's not really what I was expecting, because he had lots of modern cars. He didn't have anything like this, so he may have got a bit of a fright driving a car with no brake servo and not much in the way of driver aids. And when I say not much, I mean nothing. But we did get the car on a road. We got it MOT'd. The first thing I did, it did just about drive. So the first thing I did was to collect my wife, and we were going to go to the pub for a meal out in the afternoon. And I drove it down the road and got caught speeding and had to do a speed awareness course because the speedo wasn't working. On the plus side, I did find out why there are traffic islands before or after bus stops and why they're positioned the way they are. But so I took the car on. Now, it has done 2,500 miles nearly, or 2,200 or something like that. So it's not like it's an unfinished project. Well, it is unfinished but it's not unfinished. Basically, there were a few things I did straight away to change it. Tim wanted gold wheels on the car. I didn't. So I did that to the front wheels, which you can't see. There you go. Same wheels, just different colour scheme. They are mini light wheels. They're custom made. They're, in fact, I tell a lie. The ones on the back, which you can't see, were actually originally on the front. It had bigger wheels than that on it before, and it was stupid, and it rubbed. So that's one of the things we did. It's now got 13-inch wheels all the way around, slightly staggered. I think the back ones are 7 inches wide, I think, maybe. And I think the fronts are 6. I could be wrong. It might be smaller than that. I'm not into the whole wide, fat wheel thing. I just want it to drive right. Can't remember what size those are, but yeah, I changed the wheels and I changed the seats. Tim had big winged bucket seats in it. I didn't want that. I put in OMP brands hatch, which are sort of old retro style bucket seats. I wouldn't say they're the most amazingly made things, to be honest. They've fallen apart pretty quick and they definitely don't like sitting in the sun. But they're actually surprisingly comfy. Considering you look at them and you think, well, that's not going to be comfy. It feels quite cheap. You'd be driving this car for a long time, you don't get backache. So, yeah. So I fitted those out and I was happy with that. But other than that, there wasn't much difference. It never had a dashboard. He had it kind of, it had carpet, but it was mostly stripped out inside. I don't want that. I didn't do anything with that to start with, because the first things I had to sort out were the problems. Now, if you build a project car, you can't be hard on yourself. It will break. It will go wrong. If you've designed stuff from scratch and you've come up with ways of connecting an engine to a gearbox that shouldn't be there, and the engine's not there, I don't know why I pointed there, but you know, alien parts, it will break. There will things that will go wrong with it. And things did go wrong with it. The clutch lasted 170 miles before the release mechanism that we came up with just failed completely and dumped all the hydraulic fluid. Well, kind of in the yard, some of it on the A32, some of it on the clutch. It went everywhere. So, yeah, it's had that. The cooling system I've redone twice now, but I think I might just about be there. I've just recommissioned a heater in it because it didn't have one. It's not had a heater all this time, and that gets quite boring, I should say, in the winter because the windscreen steams up and you can't do anything about it except drive with the quarter light windows open, which are kind of cool. Yeah, you drive with those open, and it does kind of demist the screen really slowly with icy cold air. So yeah, basically I took the car from Tim and I just changed one or two things and threw it into service. And to be honest, that was intentional. It wasn't a kind of like, well, I was going to throw caution to the wind and see what happens. It was intentional. I knew that a lot of it wasn't quite right. And for that reason, is actually a blessing in disguise, really, that Tim sold the car, because he wasn't mechanically minded. He won't mind me saying that. If he had had any issues on the side of the road, if he'd broken down or whatever, he'd be back on the phone to us all the time. It would have been a yo-yo, this thing. It would have been in and out and in and out and in. It's just, it's better this way. It's because over time I've managed to refine it. Now I've got it to a point where driving-wise, it's brilliant. It's really good. The pedals are all good. The feel, the controls. I'll get onto all that later on. But yeah, on the whole, it's been great. As I say, done about 2,500 miles-ish, maybe just under. And largely, for the most part, apart from one breakdown where the fuel pump died, apart from that, it's been absolutely spot on. You're probably wondering then, what the hell's going on with it now? Well, this is largely a car that has no check strap on the door, which is quite annoying. Yeah, this is largely a work in progress, as you can see. Originally, no dashboard in it. I took the decision at the beginning, well, the end of, not even the end of 2020. Earlier than that, I wanted to put this right. I wanted to give this a proper interior, but I didn't start it until the end of 2020. And in doing so, created a hell of a lot of work for myself, because the wiring in it wasn't the finest moment, I'm not going to lie. But that may all have to be redone now. The car didn't have a dashboard. It is slowly getting a dashboard, although that's not the actual dash, that's just a mock-up thing based on the old panel. And it's also getting a rear seat. It never had a rear seat either. It does have a front-mounted radiator, which I shall show you. But yeah, basically, it's refining what was already there, making it work as best I can, because it worked, but I felt that it could be better. And that's kind of why the work restarted at the beginning of 2021. I keep likening it to a kind of a situation where you've got a car that you'd love to drive around Wales or Scotland or something like that. You'd love to do a touring job in it around all the beautiful roads and things, but you wouldn't want the hellish experience of driving it there. And that's what this car would have been. It would have been a hellish experience to drive it, even to the south of Wales, let alone up to Scotland. And I would quite like to drive this to Scotland. I think that'd be my ultimate goal, would be to take this back to Linwood, back to where it was built. But you couldn't have done it. You just couldn't have done it. And there are a number of reasons for that. Some of the things are difficult to put right, and some of the things were easier to put right. But a lot of it was down to sort of noise, vibration, harshness is probably the best way to put it. It's loud. I mean, it's loud. It's really loud. Yeah, that's why a lot of this sound deadening stuff is going in. And what I'll probably do now is I'll show you the front end first, and I'll show you the back end and explain why it is, how it is, and where it got there. And then that'll only be a brief thing. I'll go through it in more detail, different areas, different areas of the car, possibly 5, 6, 7 little mini videos, just showing you the details on certain aspects of the car and how they came to be. It's just too much to cover in one go. I mean, people are looking at the floor down there and going, what the hell's going on down there? Yeah, there's a lot to cover. So I shall show you around the car with the selfie stick, so you can get a good look, have a good nose. I'll talk you through some of it, and then we'll pick it up in more detail in future videos. But yeah, that's basically the story of how the car came to be. It went through all the way through Scotland, all the way through the south coast, nearly got scrapped on a farm, and then got rescued as a rolling shell by a man called Tim. Okay, so now we've switched to walk around mode, as you can see, and to answer a couple of the questions in previous comments and things, which is, I think, important to do. It's important to engage. Two things. Firstly, the mirror. People have pointed out, how can you see anything out of that mirror? Well, you can't, basically. It's in the wrong place. What happened was, this mirror here originally wasn't one of these bullet ones. This was a Tim Touch. Look down there we go. The original one was kind of more like one of the Marina type big square ones up here, which looked a bit rubbish, but at least you could see out of it. The hole for the mirror wouldn't normally be there. You'd normally put it here, or some imps even had them proper wing mirror, not a door mirror, proper wing mirror mounted here. So that's just in the wrong place. The door had been painted by the time we realised this, so we fitted the mirror. But to be honest with you, my inclination at the moment is to just remove them and put some badges on. Luckily, I have suitable badges. Look at that. They are from the car the engine came from. So I could put those on instead. Well, that might look a bit awful, actually. I don't know. What do you think? Put the mirror where the badge goes, just fill the holes up? Probably not. It looks a bit naff, doesn't it? So I've thrown it on the floor now as well. I'll come back into the interior in a sec, but I'll start to the front of the car. So yeah, there we go. The lighting is a bit poor. It is positioned half under a ramp. It's been here for some time, probably a year or so now. As you can see, the front of the car is a little different to a standard imp, but not massively. There are some custom touches and there are some sort of standard touches, if you like. Custom touches would include things like the lower lip spoiler here, which I'm hoping makes a difference. I didn't go into too much detail about the engine because someone will have been screaming at the screen and said, hang on, so if that's an iron block and you were supposed to put in an alloy block, has that not added loads of weight at the back that you didn't want? But there are ways of negating some of that, so we've got figures and things now. This splitter is carbon fibre. This is real carbon fibre as well. There aren't many made. The lights here are actually a very recent addition. In fact, it hasn't gone back on the road with these. I got these clear ones, these reproduction ones, a little while ago. LEDs fitted in there now, because it's kind of a bit resto moddy, so it doesn't bother me too much. It's not sort of completely authentic looking. The side lights, the headlamps are halogen conversion. I haven't put LEDs in there because I was waiting to see whether they were illegal or not, because it seemed like the ministry were changing their mind every 5 seconds. So halogen conversion in here. To be honest, these work really well, so I don't even know if I'm going to bother changing them. They do work well. I could put the side light in there. There's a hole there for it, but it's not. It's mounted down here. As I say, it's an LED, and this is the flasher. That is so bright, I probably wouldn't need the headlights on. I could just drive down the road with the hazard lights on. Because this car does have hazard lights. We fitted hazard lights. And it also has a lights on warning buzzer, which sometimes works. So you sometimes don't leave your lights on. The Imp had no grille on the front at all before. It had a removable grille here, but that's where the heater blower sat. Nothing at the top. Why? Because the engine was in the back, and so was the radiator. This time, the engine is in the back, but the radiator is not. It's here. Let me put this bonnet stay up. So the engine is in the back still, but the radiator is now in the front. It has a front-mounted radiator, and to that effect, it also has a ducting hole down the bottom for the air to go out of, which used to be a spare wheel well. There's been bracing put in to reinforce the hole that's been cut there. I don't think it's made a huge difference, to be honest, but it helps. The suspension is mounted below there as well, so you don't want to go cutting. Well, you certainly don't want to cut away the suspension pickup points, because then you're in a real world of pain with registration issues and things like that. So those are all completely original. This is one of the things that people go on about. In fact, I should probably mention something with IVA. So there are some different things to consider or to contend with when you're building a car like this. A lot of people would say, well, why don't you just put a V8 in it? Or why don't you put a Subaru engine in it? Or why don't you cut the back seats out and make a space frame and put a turbo nutter whatever in it? And the simple reason is, there's two reasons. Two reasons why. The first one is that Tim wanted an Imp. He wanted an Imp. If you end up with a space frame shell car with a fiberglass bodywork on it and a Subaru Impreza engine with a 4-wheel drive gearbox and God knows what, it's not an Imp anymore. It might look like one, but it's not. It's not an Imp. If you want the Imp experience, it's got to look like an Imp. And in fact, when we finished this car, well, we haven't finished it, but when it was being done, I said when this car was finished, my crowning achievement would be if someone who knew Imps and had an Imp went in it and said, that does still feel like an Imp. And someone has. Hello, Stuart. He's been in the car and he said, oh, that does feel like an Imp still. Mission accomplished. The main reason as well, other reason for it, not just for the whole issues with Tim wanting an Imp, is a little thing called IVA. And grey area this, and no one seems to go into this, and there's probably a reason. I'm probably going to find out why, but no YouTuber who's building a project car seems to mention this. But here we go. In the rule books, it says if you modify a monocoque shell, structurally modify it, then you lose your registration, basically. So all these people who've made pickups out of BMW estate cars or whatever, they're knackered because they're not what they say they are. They then often turn around and go, oh, it's MOT'd, and they think, yeah, because the MOT guys don't know. It's nothing to do with MOT. It's to do with registration. It's nothing to do with the annual test that it goes through. And if we were to cut out, I mean, this is where it gets people. There'll be nitpicky people. There'll be people who say, well, you've got a hole for the cooling to go through, so you've modified the shell. And it does say in the book, if you modify a monocoque shell, then it counts. You know, you have to submit the car for re-registration and everything like that. But then there are other bits in the book that say structural changes, and on one hand, you could argue and say unitary construction, anything is a structural change. I'm not convinced about that. And the other way of looking at it is that we basically started off and said, right, anything structural on this car, anything that is a suspension pickup point or a brake pickup point or steering or even engine and transmission, you cannot change. It has to be the same as it was. You can't change it, because if you change it, then I think you haven't got a case to argue. At the moment, I would argue that we do, because for a start, the wings here are welded on. Sorry. So if someone has some welding work done, an MOT, and unless they have an original Hillman Imp wing welded back on, that's a modified shell. Sorry, but it is. You know, if you cut holes in the front, as loads of them have, for cooling or whatever at the front, modified shell. If you cut at the back, cut stuff here, make any changes to the rear tailgate lifting or anything like that, modified shell. Where do you stop? That's the thing. And we took the decision. We did ask around as well. We did some research with some have spoken to people in not directly in DVSA, but people in those circles, other people who kind of know these things. And the logic was, if you touch something that's boxed or regarded as a structural member, you really haven't got a case to answer, which is why it still runs the standard gearbox, because you can't cut it out, because the gearbox is so small, there's nothing else that will fit in there. So with that in mind, the box that makes up the suspension mount on the front there, here and at the back, unchanged. There is a hole cut there, and there are some holes cut in the wheel arch with some vents in. My idea being that the wheels would create an area of low pressure inside there, and that might suck the hot air out when the cooling fan came on if you were driving down the road. Not when the cooling fan came on, sorry, just when the air blew in the front. But now I'm starting to learn a little bit more about aerodynamics. I'm seeing a flaw in that plan. So the front end is largely impish, to be honest. I mean, yeah, okay, you can see the floor, and it's only a little hole. That's why the amount of grill on the front is excessive, because there's not as much air holes for it to get back out again. There's a fuel tank here, which is an aluminium one. Tim didn't want the fuel tank connected to the front panel. Originally, there would have been a neck here. We see that, and that would have gone to there. I'm going to switch cameras. Originally, yeah, the neck would have come from here back to there, so you would have just filled it up on this little cap here. You have to open the whole bonnet to do that, but you would just fill it up on that little cap there. The issue with that, in Tim's mind, I think maybe even Tim's dad told him, if you have a crash, it can shunt the tank back and it leaks and you have fire and things, although all the heat is at the back, not at the front. So I don't know. But for whatever reason, that's what we've done. So that tank there is an alloy one. It's a little smaller than the standard one, I think. I don't know what the range is on this car. I think you probably squeeze about 200 miles out of that tank. Beside it, we have a washer bottle, which is the most overkill washer bottle you've ever seen, and then clutch and brake behind that. This is the coolant header tank, which would have been at the back of the car originally, but is now at the front. And as you can see, there's a whole raft of pipework down there, including a remote thermostat, which is there to control the heater. Yes, really. I'll go into all that at a later date, but that's what you get at the front. Obviously, the suspension is flat. It's all underneath. Doesn't encroach into the frunk, as they call it in America. But there is a strut brace bolted either side of the original front suspension pickup points. It hasn't been modified, as I say. It hasn't been fitted with coilovers. Some people cut chunks out of the inner wings and put coilovers in. Nope, this is all original. But there is a removable strut brace fitted now between those two, which the tank rests on. In fact, this is the bottom of it, at the top of it here, sorry. Just about, so you can't see it. I've got the camera's on maximum exposure, so if you can't see, you can't see. Below that here, there's two cylinders, one clutch, one brake. The fuel pump's under here. There's a fuel pre-filter at the back there, which you can just about see. And that's a heater valve. It's an electric heater valve. It is on or off, hot or cold. So that's the front. Move to the back, the business end. And there's more going on at the back with the carbon fibre. I don't know if you'll be able to pick it out. Possibly not. Maybe. Bit of a Ferrari F40 effect going on here. Yes, I did compare this to a Ferrari F40. you can see the weave of the carbon fibre through it. Now the engine is a lot heavier. This engine weighs 125 kilos. The Saxo alloy engine is about 80 or 79 or something like that. So there's a fair bit more weight. But we save some weight straight away. This weighs a kilo. This fiberglass lid, sorry, carbon fibre lid it is. See? It's not been painted or anything inside yet. That's carbon fibre. That's a weight saving. There's also no radiator in here. The radiator is at the front. That's another weight saving. There's no battery in here. The battery is now under the passenger seat. That's another weight saving. So what's going on at the back? Well, as you can see, there's an engine. That is a Saxo VTR TU engine. And that has been sat here for a while. It runs on motorbike carburetors, which are hidden under this. There you go. They're just disconnected for the time being. This is the boot floor, but it was removed originally and is now being reinstated. There's only one small part of it that will not be reinstated, which you can see here, and that's the other thing I didn't show you the other day on the video. You've got a lift up hatch. That's the bit of boot that will not be reinstated. That will just sit as the centre line there, like you can see. Yeah, that will be be kept for prosperity. So there is a bit of a boot going on here. There's the other end of the engine. As you can see, there's a coil pack. The car runs distributorless ignition. Oh, my tap! I wonder where that had gone. Result. Yeah, the car runs distributorless ignition. And yeah, as you can see, you can't really see it from here. It didn't used to have a back seat, but I've just put these back seats in and have fitted rear seat belts. So this is going to be an Imp with rear seat belts, with 4 seat belts. But yeah, this is... There'll be ways of hiding this. Don't worry, we'll come to this later on. But that is where the engine sits. The rocker cover's not finished yet because I have an original Imp oil cap, which will be welded into this cover and pop out here. There's a bit more sound deadening to do. I'm going to create a kind of airbox effect here, because when it rains, water spills over the top and goes into the carbs, which is... So yeah, I will create some sort of airbox there to seal it all off from the elements. The exhaust exit's on the left there, which is a constant source of amusement for most Imp owners, because it just does not happen on a standard Imp. On a standard Imp, it's all down this side. So say 1600cc, it's got a mild camshaft in it, a Newman's PH3 camshaft, fast road cam really, motorbike carburetors, distributorless ignition. It runs a megajolt ECU for the ignition, which is there at the moment. And yeah, this is kind of how it sits at the moment. It's still running the standard gearbox, which means the top speed is 107.4 miles an hour, and it will do that upper wall. Yeah, it hits the rev limiter in top gear pretty quickly. It's not the fastest thing in the world, don't get me wrong, it's not a speed machine, but it's 115 horsepower or so in a car that weighs probably about 800 kilos, 750, 800 kilos. So you've got to be careful because it does have the original gearbox. Now that's a good thing, because of the feel of the gear shift is just beautiful. But the gearbox is not made for that power, it's made for 37. This is the choke lever down here, but we'll get into all this in bit greater detail. As you can see, there are 2 metal pipes passing through the car. These are coolant pipes. There is coolant in those now. They are welded into the car, believe it or not, because it's better that way, I think. So yeah, that's basically the engine. Now it sits well, it works. It looks a bit funny on its own. You get a massive gap here and a massive gap here, and for someone who is obsessed with packaging, that gives me sleepless nights, but I will find ways of dealing with that. I think I might make myself a removable box that can go in there for long journeys, so I can turn it into luggage space. Determined to have more luggage space than a standard Imp in this. Dashboard, it's not ready yet, it's a work in progress, but we'll come to that, we'll cover that, and this will be the kind of thing you'll see me actually working on. The battery was moved down here. This is a racing gel battery. Yeah, that's it's still got charge, 12.7 volts, and it hasn't been touched for 9 months or so, so that's pretty impressive. But yeah, there's a fair bit going on. As you can see, these pipes are the top and bottom hose for the radiator. They pass off to the front. I'd started with the sound deadening. This is as far as I'd got, and basically when I discovered the wiring was just beyond it. It just needs redoing pretty much. So yeah, a bit bummed out about that. There is also a roll bar that goes in here over the top. That's the mounts for it down there, some plates welded in, and on the rear arches just in there. There are some quarter cards to go in it, some door cards to replace these horrible things we put in temporarily. I bought some off eBay, and they're lovely made, they fit, but they're wood, and I can't fit them because they're plywood, and I don't think plywood belongs in a car. I think it belongs in the boot if you're going to have to put it in the car, but I'm going to use them as templates and make it out of something a little bit nicer, and then sell them on to someone who wants the originality. But yeah, that's where we are with it. A fair bit more to do, as you can see. The subsequent videos for this car, most of them to start with, will just be showing you a bit more in detail how we did it, how bits were done, how that engine ended up fitting a Hillman Imp transaxle, which it does, and it works, believe it or not, for now. You know, and how certain other things were done, how the cooling system was done, why there's pipes welded into the floor, things like that. One last question I'll answer on this before I depart. A lot of people say, oh, I have one that colour. I bet you didn't have one this colour. This is actually a different colour to the original colour. The original colour is that, which does look similar, I agree. If you could see it, it would help. The original colour of this car was a colour called Aquarius Metallic. There were other colours. There was one called Kingfisher Blue, which is quite similar. There you go, the dashboard would probably be a better way of doing that, wouldn't it? So it's a bit dull there, but that's the original colour. And that's the colour it is now. It's not, there's a lot of lacquer on it, so, and there's light shining on that bit's in the shade. You'll have to take my word for it, they're pretty similar. Does that help? Nope. Yeah, basically this car is not Aquarius anymore. It was, I keep making more. Well, the cleverest thing to do would have been to hold out the original bodywork, wouldn't it? So, yeah, you can kind of, I can't hold it close to it because I'll scratch it, but they are pretty close when you get them in the right light. The reason it's not Aquarius anymore is because if it was Aquarius, it would be difficult to match colours to mix should you have to do any more paintwork on it, which I have. I've actually painted that bit down there myself with a can. The reason it would be difficult is because that colour is old and has to be mixed the old way. And modern colours, like this one, which is not a Hillman colour, it tells you what to do on the computer. You just pretty much have them pre-mixed, have them made for you. So what colour is that? That is Vauxhall Carabic Blue. If you've seen a Vauxhall Corsa GSI or SRI or a Mark III Astra, maybe even some Cavaliers came in it, that's the one. Like early 90s, that kind of colour. In fact, when I took this car on a first ever drive, I took it into a village nearby and I parked it behind a Mark III Vauxhall Astra of the same colour. So there you go. So that is the colour. It's Vauxhall Carabic Blue. It was originally Aquarius. It's very similar to Aquarius, but it was deemed more sensible to paint it a more modern colour, and in doing so we could have this more modern paint. There are bodywork issues which I shall discuss in future videos. I'll go into some detail on the wheels, the brakes, which are from a Ford Fiesta, the clutch, which is from an AX GT, the clutch, well actually no, the clutch is from a Ford Sierra, that's a lie. The clutch cover is from an AX GT. There's a fair bit going on, a fair bit to unpackage. But yeah, that's about it. That's where it is. I'll pick up how it was done soon, and then you can see how it was done in more detail, and then we'll finally think about getting it done, get some work done on it, and then we'll get it on the road. And when it's on the road, you'll see it. I'll be driving it. It'll be out on the road next year, 2022. You'll see this at events and things. So yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking with it. Thanks for not calling it clickbait. Cheers.